I think that the idea of a single national strategy for food policy can never work. I don't think it's a good idea for multiple reasons. It's certainly not any national strategy that I could imagine coming out, even if the idea was to develop something at this point, would be not useful, because I don't feel that we have utilized almost anywhere the best types of facilitation that are needed to get a systems approach to these huge, wicked problems. And what I see is the following. I think that some kind of effort to develop conversation at a very high level around the need for strategies around food policy in the U.S. is a good idea. My feeling is that what's more important than the content of what that strategy would be is a process for allowing it to occur. The journey and the goal is the process, and of nailing a process, multiple processes. It won't be one process. I think that the major issues really revolve around the idea of being stuck in very old models, paradigms, almost complete lack at the policy level of systems thinking, almost a complete lack of bipartisanship, which there used to be inside of food policy in the U.S. People are charging ahead with an interest in food that strikes me as not being all that helpful to the big issues that we really have to solve. Hunger, climate change, the effects of the food, the interactive effects of the food system on hunger, what should be the interactive effects of the food system with climate change, obesity. It's super clear to me that, for example, and of course I'm biased, but the IOM report that came out in January 2015 that talks about how to assess all of these major issues through a systems lens and looking at a minimum the 4 domains of social and economic and environmental and health is how you would have to start this conversation. This whole systems approach to dialogue, and I'm just writing a paper on wicked problems for a conference next week. All the approaches to wicked problems show that you have to include all the major players. You don't have to include them all in one big room. You don't have to include them to talk about everything under the sun. Collaboration is not the same as policy per se, but it can lead to really interesting reinterpretations of how policies are working. And that's called oversight, and it's a really useful exercise. They're wicked problems, and they're wicked in so many different ways that people have to buy into. They have to recognize, how do you develop legitimacy for different people's opinion, how do you develop a tolerance, again, for people's different opinions without wanting to immediately beat them up when they disagree with you, and how do you capture pieces of policy and pieces of the food system, because you can't do the whole thing at one time. It's huge. I don't think most people take the time to think about how enormous the food system actually is. If you were going to start writing a national strategy for food, the first thing you'd have to say is everybody has to sit down and think for a month, without just immediately coming out with their agenda, their biases, their feelings of what's right and wrong. With a wicked problem, there's no right or wrong answers. As I was just reading someplace yesterday, there's only better or worse. All right? And if you can't come into the room with that ability to think that way, it's going to be really hard to get anywhere. How do we get enough leaders to understand this and build the capacity in the people who are going to be making these decisions to be reflective, to encompass a wider view, etc.? I think a whole lot of people don't know how many tools we already have to utilize here. I understand that. People are really busy doing really wonderful things, but most of that, in many cases, that means most people are not seeing the bigger picture. I think somebody should choose one food system issue, one really big food system issue, and see what we could do with that. Use it as have a pilot for for putting together some kind of process that might be reflective of enough people's interest that it would be credible.